Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. I'm doing okay myself. I have a bit of a cold, so I'm a little bit stuffy. Apologies if I come through sounding a little bit strange today. But, you know, the good news is that I decided to soldier on and still be here on our Friday appointment to do my Friday reads. So in this video, as usual, as I do every week, I'll talk about the books that I finished this week and also the books that I've started reading. So the first book that I wanted to talk to you about today is Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino. If you watch my nonfiction November TBR, which I published early this week, it feels like ages ago now, I said that I was going to read Trick Mirror in November. But, you know, I decided to go ahead and start reading it. What I didn't anticipate is that it would take me so little time to read it. So I finished it within 2 or 3 days. I thought it would last me into November. And yeah, so Trick Mirror is this collection of original essays. In case you don't know, Gia Tolentino is an up-and-coming writer at The New Yorker. She writes regularly for that publication. But these essays are all original. They haven't been published anywhere else before. They're long-length essays. I think they're like, I believe, 9 essays. And she has a very interesting voice. She has the voice of a young millennial feminist. If you're interested in that, if you want to get that kind of like younger perspective. I mean, I don't know how old you are. You may be younger than Gia Tolentino for all I know, but for me, she's younger than me. It's what I'm trying to say. And she has a very specific perspective. I think we ought to be careful with that kind of voice of a generation stuff. I think she would recoil in horror from those kind of labels, and I think we shouldn't be so trigger happy at applying them to her or to any other writer. So her essays are all topical, so this is a slight criticism that I have about the book, which is not really a criticism on... I think the book is great, okay? So there are essays on topical issues, on politics and popular culture. She uses a lot of references from popular culture, but not only. Her book is US-centric, and because I know that, I'm not in the US, but I'm more or less au fait with US culture, but I know that a lot of you guys are in other countries and you may or may not be au fait with the latest controversies or debates in American culture. And if you're not, then this book might not speak to you, so beware of that. It's extremely US-centric, as can be expected. So it's, I expected that when I picked it up. But, she deals with feminism and racism and all kinds of universal problems or issues, but she does it from a US-centric perspective, so beware of that. I enjoyed it. I liked her voice. I would happily read more by her, and if I subscribe to The New Yorker, I would read her regularly, but I don't subscribe to The New Yorker because I'm poor. Reading this book, she was preaching to the choir. Like, I just nodded along as I read, so there wasn't anything in it that challenged me, challenged my views, made me confront myself with some darker sides of my personality or my ideology. In that sense, it wasn't an enriching read. And I'm saying all of this because I wanted to have clear expectations if you decide to pick it up. All that said, it is a great book. It is a great book, and I recommend it if you're interested in those issues and you're okay with the book being US-centric, then definitely it's worth a read. And then if you've been reading my Friday reads, watching my Friday reads regularly, you probably know that I'm reading John Cheever's stories, that I started doing that a few weeks ago. And even on one of my previous Friday reads, I asked you guys to recommend short stories by John Cheever to me. And there were 2 short stories that most people recommended. Most people recommended either one or the other, or actually both of them. And one was A Swimmer, which I then reread because I had read it before, and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. And then I read The Enormous Radio, and actually I was meant to talk about The Enormous Radio on last week's Friday reads, but I forgot. So I'm talking about it now. Yeah, it's great. I don't think I had read it before. It's just a fantastic story about relationships and where the boundaries between what is acceptable in a relationship and what's not acceptable in a relationship may lie, and how we may have the wrong perspective on relationships. And I know I'm being like incredibly abstract here, but I'm often reluctant to talk about plot in these videos. You might have noticed that. I don't think plot is the main it's not the main thrust for me when I read. It's not the main reason why I read. I know other readers are different, so I don't pay that much attention to the plot in itself. It has to work with style and language and all kinds of other things for me. But when we're dealing with short stories, I mean, the plot is so minimal that if I told you the plot, even if I outlined it, I would be spoiling the story. And, you know, I don't care much about being spoiled myself, but I know a lot of people are, and I hugely respect that. And also I think, because it's a short story, you know, there is a case against spoiling short stories, because this particular short story, like The Enormous Radio, which has such a big impact when you read it. So going, not knowing anything about it, that's my suggestion. But for crying out loud, read The Enormous Radio by John Cheever. Thanks to everyone who recommended it. I had a great time reading it. It only takes like, I don't know, 10 minutes, so go read it. Okay, another book that I've been reading recently over the last few weeks, and I think like most of this month actually, was Ficciones by Jorge Luis Borges. These are short stories, and it was my second read. So I have this gorgeous edition, let me show it to you, which is a new Spanish language edition. But this book is translated into most languages, and you'll find it easily in English. What can I say about Borges? I mean, I read a story here and there, so it took me a while to get through it, because I was taking my time, and I recommend that. You can also read it back to back. You can also just read the stories in any order you want, but I think if you read it in the order in which they're published here, the experience is more enriched. And what can I say about Borges? If you love literature, if you love storytelling, if you love language, if you love the human imagination and the writer's ingenuity, you should read this. You should definitely read this. It's not for everyone, but if you love those things, then it is going to be for you. So read Fictions by Jorge Luis Borges. Be like me, read Borges. I'm sorry if you find this video a little bit sillier than usual, but I think it's the cold medication. That's what I'm saying anyway. Another book that I finished is another Latin American classic, La Región Más Transparente, which in English is Where the Air is Clear by the late Mexican writer Carlos Fuentes. This was a hugely difficult book, but I buddy read this with my boyfriend, and we reading it together at the same time. It was a great experience. It's the second book we do that with, but it also helped us to understand the book. It has a lot, how could I describe this book? It has a lot of different voices, and it's a book that deals with the generation that profited from the Mexican Revolution. So we're in the 1950s. That's when the book was written. So it's a contemporary retelling of, or not a retelling, but it's a fictionalized, or it's a contemporary portrayal of a very specific generation in the history of Mexico. You'd have to know a little bit about the Mexican Revolution, but this book, can be the key to learn about those things. So if you're interested in Mexico at all, and you should read this book. It's not going to be an easy read at all. It's going to be confusing, but if you take your time, if you're willing to take a pause and check, and if you buy a good edition like this one that has essays on the book, essays on the novel, that would surely help. But yeah, I love this book so much. It's the La Región Más Transparente, or in English, Where the Air is Clear by Carlos Fuentes. Because we finished that, we started immediately, right away, we started another buddy read. And that was Love in the Times of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I have this Spanish language edition, of course, because I read in Spanish. Spanish is my first language. Whenever I read Latin American fiction, I read it in the original. It'd be silly of me to read it in translation. So I bought this cloth-bound edition, which is illustrated as well. So let me show you some of the illustrations. It's this kind of thing, which, may not be for everyone, but I particularly enjoy it. I have read let me show you more illustrations. I have read quite a fair bit by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1982, by the way. So, now that we had the announcement of the 2018 and 2019 awards recently. So yeah, he won in 1982. And this is one of his most famous novels. The other one, of course, which is the most famous novel, is 100 Years of Solitude. But, some fans of his work Um, it's this funny thing that for some people his best work is 100 Years of Solitude, and for others is The Love in the Time of Cholera. It's a little bit like with the Brontes, how some people prefer Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte and other people prefer Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I'm team Jane Eyre, I'm team Charlotte Bronte, don't at me. I know there are plenty of booktubers who are team Wuthering Heights, but we're still friends, it's all good. So I think there's a similar thing happening here, but of course we're dealing with two books by the same author, not, books by sisters, so it's a little bit different. I believe I've read this in the past, but it was so long ago that I don't really remember much about it. We started reading it, we haven't read that much yet, about 10%, yeah, like around here. And, this edition came with this beautiful postcard as well, which I enjoy. I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think this is an illustration from Peter Pan or something, but anyway. Yeah, I'm enjoying it. His writing is gorgeous, and authors like Garcia Marquez make me so glad that I can read it in Spanish, because his language is just gorgeous. And I'm sure he's not difficult to translate, but I am afraid that something must be lost in translation, because I don't think the English language could be as sensual and as Caribbean in a non-stereotypical way as Garcia Marquez's writing can be. So yeah, I'll be talking more about this book in future weeks. And the final book that I read this week was La Orla by Guy de Maupassant. As you know, recently I finished Bel Ami by Guy de Maupassant, and a while back I read Boule de Suif by Guy de Maupassant. Guy de Maupassant was one of those writers from Universal Literature, from French literature specifically, that I had heard about so much and I'd never read. So, I decided to begin small, so I went for Boule de Suif, which is a novella. I loved it. I can't fault it. Then I picked up Bel Ami. I loved it. I can't fault it. I talked about it, I think last week. And then I thought, well, I will read another novella by him. So I read La Orla, which is horror. And one thing about me, I don't like horror. I don't read horror. I don't watch horror movies. I hate horror. I absolutely hate it. I don't mind psychological kind of horror, like, Psycho by Hitchcock. Something like that I'm on board with. But I don't like gore, I don't like ghosts, I don't like being spooked. But I liked everything I've read by Guy de Maupassant so much. Guy de Maupassant. He's from Arizona. Guy de Maupassant. And so I decided to pick it up. I mean, surely reading something is not as scary as watching something on the screen. So I picked it up. And I liked it, the writing is perfect. It's not my thing because of the genre, but if you like horror, you need to read La Orla by Guy de Maupassant. And if you love Guy de Maupassant, don't like horror, still pick it up like I did. I survived it. It didn't actually scare me, but I love the way it was written, so I recommend it. And now we come to the point where I need to make my Victober update. Yeah, I'm still on course to failing Victober. but I've reached 50% of Middlemarch and I'm into it because Dorothea is back. I realized that the only thing about Middlemarch that I'm really invested in, or the only plot line or the only character that I'm invested in, is Dorothea and everything that surrounds her. And I think that was my problem before. I think the moment in the book when you drop Dorothea and George Eliot begins talking about Mary Barth and all these other characters, that's when I became disengaged and stopped reading in the past. But as Soldier Dawn, that's a theme of this week, soldiering on with a cold and everything, just soldier on. And I continued, and now Dorothea is back. So I love that. And I know that she'll be back, and unfortunately, somebody has spoiled the ending of Dorothea's story, and I should have told you this before. Gia Tolentino, yeah, Trick Mirror. She has an essay where she talks about heroines in literature, and she talks about Anna Karenina, and she talks about Middlemarch, and she talks about Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and other books with female main characters, main characters who are female. And she spoils the heck out of all those books. I didn't mind because I've read Anna Karenina, I read Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and the other ones that she talks about, I think I've read them all except Middlemarch. So, thankfully, I'm okay with spoilers. But yeah, beware if going back to Trick Mirror, if you pick it up, there is an essay. I can't remember what it is, but there is an essay. When she starts talking about novels, you might want to skip that if you haven't read them. Like quickly skim through it to check the titles, and because she spoils the ending of all of them and she tells you the whole plot. But they're classics, so for the most part. I think she also talks about the Virgin Suicides, which I haven't read, but it's unlikely that I will soon, so I didn't care. And I've seen the movie anyway, so I know what happens. So yeah, 50% into Middlemarch, over 50% over Middlemarch. So, I don't know, I might be ambitious, but I'm feeling good. I feel like I'm gonna finish it before the end of October. And if you go back and check my Victober TBR, I do say in that video that as long as I finish Middlemarch in October, I will consider Victober a success, So yeah, I'm gonna try, you people. But if not, I'll finish it in November, and it won't be the end of the world, will it? And the other Victober update that I had is because I was getting frustrated with Middlemarch before the return of my beloved Dorothea. I decided to pick up another book from my TBR, so I felt like I was, contributing to that. So I picked up Villette by Charlotte Bronte, and I know that the novel is a little bit confusing at the beginning. It's not really confusing, but it's hard to know where it's going. But I realized that I love Charlotte Bronte's writing so much. I mean, Jane Eyre, I said it earlier, I'll say it again, and I'll say it as many times as necessary. I'm hashtag Team Charlotte Bronte, hashtag Team Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is one of my all-time favorite books. I don't care, I've read it 2 or 3 times, and I would read it again gladly. I would read it again this afternoon. I love it. And I realized that it wasn't a flash in the pan. Villette, it's also so well written. I just love it. I just get into it so easily, and I feel like I'm there. But I'm gonna have to put it in the back burner because I need to focus on Middlemarch. Anyway, enough about Victober, enough about me, in fact. I'm gonna take my cold medicine and go lie down now and pick up Middlemarch. I hope you're having a good week. I hope you have a great weekend. If you have if you've read any of the books that I talk about, let me know in the comment section down below and we'll discuss them. Or also, if you haven't read any of those books but you want to tell me what books you've been reading this week, I really want to hear about that, so let me know in the comment section down below. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.